Ding. Welcome again to another monthly community meeting of the Agones project. We're delighted that you could join us today.
I like your radio voice.
People seem to appreciate it.
Well, let's kick it off. Ravi, you want to talk? I wasn't sure if you'd make it, so I stuck my name on the first one, but feel free to replace it with yours. The 127 release just got cut, so release candidate was last week. The release got finished yesterday, so yay! It was the first time Ravi cut a release. We're all very excited. Went very smoothly.
Yeah, thank you.
And let's see, I'm just reminding myself what's new, in case people haven't gone and read the release notes. We upgraded to a version of Go, so for developers and maintainers, we can start using fun new features. Go finally added support for generics, which is kind of cool. And we've made lots of other improvements. So we've got image streaming is now enabled by default on GKE if you follow the getting started guides or use the Terraform that's been provided. It's also been turned on the EE cluster, so the tests are running through that configuration. We've added a feature where if you want to use a cluster autoscaler to do cluster compaction by evicting your pods, you need to make sure you're setting graceful termination properly, but you can now do this before we prevented you from doing it. So this is great if you have a use case where you know that your game servers can be evicted with some time to shut down safely. And I think are the biggest sort of changes. Mark, you got your hand up.
You added documentation for that, and now I can't remember where you put it. I was going to add it to the notes because it was neat.
Yes, let me find a link.
It's not in scheduling and auto scaling, is it?
I'm pretty sure it's under advanced. It's not in scheduling and auto scaling. Are you sure?
Scheduling and auto scaling. Might be under.
Yeah, it's right here. It's under scheduling and auto scaling.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see it here. Okay. I got it. Under cluster autoscaler.
Yep. Yeah. So I guess for other people, it's kind of buried by design, right? This is a very advanced feature. You should use it if you know what you're doing. And if you know what you're doing, you're probably looking to figure out how to do it. And then you'll come across this section. And yeah, so basically you can add an extra annotation. Previously, if you tried to add this annotation, we would actually overwrite it. Now we're not going to overwrite it, which means that if you are specifically adding this annotation to your pods, that then now they can get preempted. So I think we kind of mentioned it, but we should probably add it to the sample now that I'm thinking about this. Usually if you add this annotation, you're going to also want to add a corresponding graceful termination clause to your pod as well. So I think actually that would be something we should add to the documentation to show, like, hey, if you're adding this part, you should also add this part. Let me make a note in the notes here, and I'll send a PR for that later.
Yeah. Oh, I see why it's in where it is. Okay. Got it. Hi, Papa. There's probably an interesting conversation in there as well that, like, even under distributed mode, I think the cluster autoscaler won't actually evict the pod anyway, which is not documented, but I'm fairly sure is how to work because it doesn't know what group it's attached to.
So explain that more. What do you mean it doesn't know what group it's attached to?
So I need to go double check and go look at the code, but I'm fairly sure our friends that were looking at this looked at the code for the cluster autoscaler. And the cluster autoscaler, while this is not documented, if you look at the code, it basically can look at a pod and be like, oh, if this is attached to like a deployment, I know what that is, so I know it's safe to evict. But if I see a pod that I don't know if it's what it's attached to is like a grouping, then I think it isn't safe to evict. I'm going to err on the side of caution and not evict it. So where we have this in our docs and we say here, like when using pact, we say like that we add this save to evict false, which I think is good. I think it's going to be functionality. It's going to be exactly the same on distributed, but yeah,
That's correct.
minor point and not a huge deal.
But I think we assume with distributed that you're probably not running a cluster autoscaler. Like
oh, true. That's a good point.
Spreading your pods across all your nodes.
Yeah,
you're not trying to remove nodes and compact. So I think that's why we're not focused on it for that use case.
Nope. That makes 100% sense. Never mind.
But yes, you're right. The behavior, the cluster autoscaler is going to look at the game server pods, think that they are not sort of replicatable, that they don't have an underlying controller that's going to restart them, and it will not evict them. Unless you specifically add the annotation that's shown in the documentation that tells the cluster autoscaler, no, we know what we're doing at this one. You can remove it if you want to.
Yeah. All right. Never mind.
Awesome. So next on the agenda is there've been a couple of AWS specific issues that have been filed since our last community meeting. I linked to both of them here. I think in both of these cases, it's hard for a lot of the sort of core maintainers of the project who don't really have a great way to test on AWS to reproduce and to diagnose or understand the underlying problem. So I wanted to kind of put a call out if there are folks that are knowledgeable on AWS. We'd love some help with AWS specific issues that arise both on GitHub and in Slack. I do feel like the ones in Slack tend to get more notice and get more responses. So I guess maybe that's another thing to mention to folks. If you are looking for help, it's great to file an issue, but it's oftentimes, especially if you're on a non-Google platform where it's harder for people that are monitoring GitHub more often to reproduce, right? If you're on DigitalOcean or Amazon or Microsoft or Bare Metal, if you post something in Slack, I think more people are going to see it. So it's always great to file an issue because we can always link back to the issue. Sometimes when people put stuff in Slack, we ask them to file an issue also, so that we have sort of a record and other people can find it through Google search and help them debug in the future. But if you are in this situation and you file an issue and you're not getting traction, I would highly suggest also posting in Slack. So I guess I would suggest doing both, filing the issue for persistence and then posting in Slack, especially if you don't get traction on the issue, to maybe see if that helps get an answer. I've definitely seen cases where people have posted in both and the issue kind of sits without a lot of updates. And then there's an update that was like, hey, this got solved in Slack. And if you look in Slack, there's like a thread with like 20 responses and people debugging and working together and getting through things. So I just want to put a call out there. I don't know if anybody on the call is an AWS expert or would know how to fix either of these issues. I'm certainly not. But maybe somebody who's watching the recording will see it and go jump in and help out.
Yeah, we had one in Slack that had to do with whether the network was set up as IPv4, IPv6, a genuine something, and something wasn't working. They worked it out. I was like, please submit a PR to let us know what the thing should be.
Awesome. All right, Mark, the next one's yours.
Is it time to Kubernetes ++? Are we at new version yet?
Yeah, I think the last time I checked, the answer was we needed to wait for EKS to bump.
Okay.
Because if we look at our official policy, it's that we won't move to a version that you can't run on one of the three major cloud providers, right? So Amazon doesn't, like right now, Amazon only supports 20, 21, 22, and 23 of Kubernetes. So I think we're at 23 right now as well. So if we go up to 24, then we're basically telling anybody who's running on Amazon that they can't run the newest release of Agones.
Where are we? So we're at
we're at 123.
We have 124 on Rapid. All right. So I'm looking at
Google, yeah. But if we bump our project up to 124, then that means that anybody that wants to use the officially supported version combination is prevented from doing so on Amazon, which either means they're going to run a SKU that we haven't tested and don't support, they can't run the newest version, which is going to put pressure on us to backport fixes, which we'd prefer not to do.
Well,
we prefer for people to stay with the current releases. So I feel like in the past, here's the release calendar. I've found the release calendar. The Amazon EKS release for 1.24 is expected in November of 2022. which is coming up next week.
All right, next week.
So we can keep an eye on that. I think if we get, I'd say, more than like halfway through this release cycle and it's not there, it's probably too late to bump, and we should do it right after the next one,
Yeah.
which is sort of very early December.
You know, that was.
I don't know where you got April from.
Preview. That's what I was looking at the calendar. Oh, that's end of life. Yeah, I don't care about the last one. That's what it was 124.
Where
That was off there. AKS, did I get that right? I got that from AKS. Oh, sorry, AKS. I'm getting the ones mixed up. EKS.
Okay, yeah,
And
so
then it's
I'm looking at the EKS.
That's better. I was just going by release calendar for.
Okay.
I always think that AKS is Amazon. AKS is Azure.
Because of the A. Yes.
Because the A. Yeah.
Yeah. So the release calendar for EKS, they actually say that upstream was May 3rd, 2022 for 1.24. It looks like Microsoft is saying that it was in April, which is kind of funny that they don't agree on when upstream was cut. I'm sure we could go find the right answer, but I'm not particularly inclined to do that right now. Either way, I think where we're at right now is you can run 124 on GKE, you can run 1.24 on Azure, and we expect within the next month you'll be able to run it on EKS. So I think the answer to your question is, if we want to be ahead of the curve, we can bump it later during this next release cycle, since we've got 6 weeks. If we see it show up on Amazon and we have enough bandwidth, or we can, I think, pretty safely do it for the following release.
Yeah,
that's sort of the very beginning of the release cycle.
Not so. Sounds like aiming for, what are we, 128 now? So 1.29.
Yeah. And 128 comes out beginning of December, like December 9th, I believe.
Yep.
And the following one sort of in the 2nd or 3rd week of January. So that kind of gives people through the end of this year with the current version. I think that will give people plenty of time for 1.24 to have soaked on the cloud providers and possibly be getting closer to the stable channel by the time we cut that release.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So we certainly don't want to wait longer than that, I guess is my other point, right?
Yes, I agree. Kubernetes itself is definitely moved to like a quarterly. Is it quarterly now?
I think it was quarterly. Now they're doing 3 per year. Last I checked. 3
per year.
Because the 4th of those quarters was always like super compressed, because it was like all of the holidays at the end of the year, and that like release cycle was always kind of small and awkward. And they had to pick dates really carefully. Yeah, so they've reduced it to, I think, 3 per year. And so we used to basically go every other version, because we were every 6 weeks, and they were exactly double that every 3 months. Now that they're every 4 months, it's more like after 2, then after 3, then after 2, then after 3, sort of cadence for us.
That makes sense.
Cool. All right. So I stuck a couple more issues on here that have been filed since our last community meeting. The next one is one that I filed. We've had this conversation multiple times with people about discussing when you might use Agones, when you might use stateful sets, like what the advantages are of both of those for running your game servers. There are certain cases where stateful sets sort of fit the use case, and there are lots of cases where the behavior of stateful sets isn't quite what you're looking for. And I know, like, I've definitely heard Mark describe this really well multiple times, but I can't find anything in our documentation that actually describes the difference and why you'd pick one or the other. So this is mostly a reminder that, like, Mark should write this up, since he's got a good answer to this. And if anybody else has thought through this, or especially if anybody else is, writing a game where they've chosen to use stateful sets, like, it'd be awesome. Like, I don't want to say Agones is not always the right solution, right? There are times where stateful sets are better. And I think we definitely need to highlight when you'd pick each one, and make sure we're steering people in the right direction. And so I was going to say, especially if you're actually like using stateful sets, or you're using both stateful sets and Agones, providing, if your game architecture is proprietary and you don't want to share exactly what you're doing, but providing sort of the guidance that you would give to somebody else of when to choose each one would be awesome. So I think we can take a first cut at this, and by we I mean Mark, and I'll keep poking him to do that. But if other people want to contribute, we'd love to hear from people who are making this choice and why they're doing so, and sort of feed that into our documentation to help everybody else.
Just added it to my to-do list.
Thank
Long
you.
to-do list, but I added it.
Things should slow down, right, for the holidays.
Sure.
All right, so the next one I stuck on here was another issue that's been filed since our last meeting, which was somebody had suggested that we change the namespace for our protobuf for allocation. This is for the gRPC endpoint, because the generated code for the current protobuf doesn't make it clear, like if you're looking at your own code and you're linking into it, that this is like an Agones allocation protobuf that you're talking to. It's just called allocation, it's not sort of namespace with Agones at the beginning. And it'd be clear, like for us it's not a problem because all of our code is Agones. But if you're linking the clients into your other code, it makes it really obvious that this is like a proto that relates to Agones and relates to allocating things. That to me sounds like a great usability improvement. My concern is about compatibility and what happens if you change the namespace of a proto. I think it will stop working. So we actually, I think, have to do a reasonable amount of work to basically expose on the server side both the old and the new namespace as sort of two gRPC endpoints that are both registered. They can sort of fall into the same code, right? Because the underlying encoding of the proto would remain the same. I'm not actually sure exactly what that looks like mechanically, but that would allow clients to use either the old way or the new way for some amount of time, and then we could drop support for the old way. So I think usability-wise, this sounds great. In terms of compatibility, we want to make sure we don't break people, which is the biggest concern here. And so we have to figure out A, how long we want to run both in parallel, and B, to make sure we actually can run both in parallel. And then that sort of leads into the question of like, is the usability improvement worth that effort and the maintenance burden of doing that? And so I raised those questions on the issue, but I thought I'd also bring it up here since we haven't had a chance to discuss it, and see if anybody had thoughts.
The only other thought I had is I'm trying to find the documentation for the tool that generates the code, which I can't find because reasons. I was wondering if, as a user, you could change the package for protobuf and still have it be backward compatible as like a command line option or something. I don't know if that's a thing. I was like, that would seem like a thing that would possibly be in there.
Yeah, I know the proto authors have gone to great lengths to allow you to modify the protocol over time while retaining compatibility.
Really? Yeah.
At like the field and like the resource level, like the
That's a good
RPCs and
point
the fields
too.
and everything.
Yeah.
I don't know if they've done the same thing for packages, right? Like it may be like you pick your package and you've got it
You're
forever.
done. Yeah.
So yeah, we can do some investigation there. Maybe they've come across ways to help people through this sort of transition if they realize they pick a bad package name.
Yeah, there's got to be a path through there. But I was also wondering, like, if you proto C, that's the thing I'm looking for. If you're like, depending on the language you're using as well, like like if I'm using Go, I can generate proto C code. I can generate Go code and basically put it in whatever directory I want, and that package is my client. But I don't know if the same is true for other languages, or maybe if you're trying to include it, there's probably some of that too. There's
yeah, like the generated Java code, I know there's an option, like a Java option, which it generates a specific Java package, right? So you're kind of stuck with the name of the generated code. I think the same was true for us and a couple other languages like C#. So I think the other thing this reminds me is that if we are adding new proto stuff in the future, we should probably make sure we bike shed sufficiently about the name because we're going to potentially be stuck with it forever. So I don't recall exactly when this proto went in. It was maybe before I started working on the project. And I don't know how much discussion there was about the name or sort of considerations of
it wasn't
impact, right? So, but especially if we find during this investigation that we're stuck with it forever, we should make sure that in the future we are cognizant of that.
I
All right, I'm gonna move on to the next one.
Move on,
I
move
was
on, move on.
watching Mark Googling. So the next thing was one of our friends filed a bug for improved documentation for people that are using IPv6. Mark, you responded on the ticket with like, hey, we can do this and we can do this. And I know that floating around in various people's heads, there are some answers here. And we do have a little bit of information on our FAQ about using the new feature that recently was promoted to stable for using the DNS name of a node as part of your allocation, so your clients can connect and you can use. I think that with IP, it's like 4 to 6 tunneling to reach your node. It would be, I think, nice to have like a single documentation page talking about IPv6 connectivity, where we kind of discuss the different options, right? So there's different ways that we've seen people do this, and if we kind of put those all in one place, I think that'll improve discovery. But I think also they are not all written down necessarily, right? I think some of them you can find if you maybe search through tickets or search through Slack history. Some of them are documented in different places on our website, but it would be nice to have sort of one page for people that are looking for IPv6 stuff.
No, I agree. There's a lot. It feels like there's also a lot of confusion about what it means to be IPv6 compatible, and a lot of people go, "Oh, it has to have an IPv6 address," but it doesn't. I mean, if you're looking at iOS, it needs to work on the IPv6 stack, which is a very different conversation.
Right. Yes, and that's also something that we can clarify too, right? Even if your cluster doesn't have IPv6 addresses that can be connected to over IPv6, it doesn't mean that your clients can't be running IPv6. Cool. I think I'm going to flip to the next two because I think the next one's going to be really quick, and then I wanted to save enough time, Mark, for you to go through your issue. So I did want to mention there was a ticket filed probably about a year ago asking about running Agones on autopilot, which we closed. This won't fix because when GKE Autopilot was first launched, it had a huge number of restrictions in terms of all the things you couldn't do on GKE Autopilot, including quite a few core things that Agones needed, like validating and mutating webhooks, among lots of other things. So over the course of its life since then, Autopilot has been slowly introducing support for all of these features that we would need to run Agones. And at this point, it's getting pretty close to having all of the features that we need. The last major blocker is host ports, which is currently being worked on. And so one of the guys on our team is starting to look at trying to close the rest of the gaps to actually allow Agones to run on GKE Autopilot. So I just wanted to let people know there's a tracking issue here. If that's something you're interested in, feel free to follow along. If you have thoughts on some of the designs that are going to come out of this, because we're going to need to tweak a couple things to make it work, that's also a great place to follow along to see kind of where those sort of designs are going to branch out to different parts of the code. All right, Mark, now we'll throw it to you for, I think, what'll be the meaty topic of the day.
Oh, I didn't actually
new features.
Yeah, I didn't think it was that meaty. I was just gonna I mean, it's meaty-ish depending on how far people want to go into it. But basically I primarily wanted to say I think we've gone through enough iterations on it that we have a pretty stable design. So just to do a quick recap as well, arbitrary counts and lists. If anyone's played with the player tracking stuff, where we can have like lists of players and how many do we have and capacity for players, it became increasingly obvious that having essentially counters and lists of items were incredibly useful for a variety of use cases, not just player tracking. And people were hacking player tracking to do other things other than track players because it was useful for other stuff. So wanted to sort of, oh God, I'm feeling pretentious. I wanted to elevate that to a higher functionality. I've been watching way too much pretentious cook TikTok. And build out, basically replace the player tracking functionality with something that was more generic, and could handle different types of use cases. I also commonly refer to this as how many ways can we abuse etcd. But yes, to my point, I think the design is in a happy place that I'm pretty happy with. My next task on this is to actually write like a checklist of individual items that can be taken on independently. So we can sort of split out some of the work and and hopefully work on it as a group. But also big thanks to everyone who has provided feedback, and there's been a lot of it, and it's been great. But I think, yeah, it's in a good spot. I think that's probably where I would leave that.
Yeah, I think I consider this one to be meaty because I know that there's lots and lots of details in there. There's lots of discussions that have happened around, whether things should have duplicates or not have duplicates, how this works with the autoscaler, what fields the autoscaler is looking at in terms of sizing and what it means to size up or down, and how we're inferring that. So if people have questions about those things, I think there's lots of places we can go pretty deep in discussion on these things. If folks are ambivalent or have sort of already read and grokked the issue, then that's cool too.
It is a long one. I wrote a lot of words. But yeah, feel free to read also asynchronously, write notes and stuff like that. Yeah, I need to break this down into some chunky work. Put them on my to-do list as well. But I'm excited for this. I think it's going to be really useful. We'll make sure we'll also have some sort of guide or something of like, how do I move this from play? If I'm using player tracking now, how do I move this over? And we'll make sure that we do that in a considerate way for people who are using player tracking.
That's a good point. And I guess also along those lines, because player tracking is alpha, I think the current plan is basically to do a knife switch of one release is going to have player tracking and the next release is not. It's going to have this instead, which will be similar. Like, you'll have the same functionality, but all the names and stuff will be different. So that will be a case where if you are dependent upon the current player tracking APIs, that you will not have sort of a seamless upgrade between Agones versions.
Yeah, we could do a mild overlap, like you have a version where you have both, and then the next version it goes away.
That's true.
Actually, which would also give a good opportunity for people to migrate and provide feedback in case they're like, oh, I did this thing with player tracking and now I can't do it anymore for whatever reason. But yeah, no one started work yet, so don't panic.
Okay, so I'll put a note. I think this kind of captures what we both said, which is, unlike things like the protobuf namespaces for gRPC, we're not planning on providing either a seamless transition or sort of a long maintenance period. Although for ease of transition, we will consider running the old and the new ones for a few versions, for at least one or maybe a couple of versions in parallel.
What will probably happen is we'll run them together until someone gets bored one day and goes, I should really get rid of that.
Well, or until if the new one gets promoted to beta, I think at that point we would certainly.
That's definitely true. That is definitely true. That is a good statement.
Cool. Do you want to do a little bit of issue triage?
That was my thought. Alrighty. Let me bring up issues. Share this. Do we have any that are currently marked as stale that should probably be closed? We do. All right. Let's double check this. All right. There is this one, which was a question. So it looks like that can be closed.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Whoops. I did apps first because that was silly. Somebody filed an issue, like right now. Oh, no, it was someone. It was me closing. Never mind. M1 Mac. This should be fixed because I think this is they were running Minikube. Try both. Yeah, that was that bug there. Okay. Are they on a Minikube? Okay, I think this is fixed. When we'd released ARM, but
I see.
there
So
was an
Minikube
issue.
on an M1 Mac runs an ARM VM and not an x86 VM, it sounds like.
Yeah, which should now work.
Yep, that should now work. Cool.
That should now work. This is the ticket for performance reporting. What did we end up here? It hasn't been updated in 2 years. You marked it as stale, Robbie. Back in September, I think. Should we close this?
Let's close that. I mean, it's there. We can always reopen it. The information's all there. It just will be less clutter in terms of open issues for us to look at.
Also, I think maker.dev is not a thing anymore.
Yeah, I think that's true too.
Yeah, so we can restart it if necessary, possibly.
And the other one's in a similar place.
I'll also give that change log. That works. It would be nice, but it's such a nightmare. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's close.
I think we've done most. I was just reading through this. Like we switched to CMake. Like we've done some of this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why it didn't get closed when we did that. Like back in 2018, there was a pull request.
I think the answer to that is what we're going to do is like run it on like an actual Windows machine as part of our like automated testing. To confirm that it actually does what we think it does, because there are different paths for like if you're on Windows versus if you're on like Linux.
I see.
But we don't have that capability, and it's like really hard. So like, it doesn't seem like we're gonna do this right now. Is the short answer.
I agree.
All right. That option is doing it like a GitHub action or something. Close it. I think that closes all the stale stuff. Yep. All righty. Issues sort. Least recently updated. Okay. What is this one?
The first one. Oh, so that was from our friendly C++ expert, who was saying that we shouldn't have checked in generated proto files for protos that we don't own.
Seems to include generating source code for protos it doesn't own. Oh.
So it says we should be fetching the protos from the official place. Right, and he's got a link to where pb.h files are checked in our C++.
Right. I don't know enough about anything C++ to confirm nor deny.
Right.
So it sounds like we should leave this alone. Does that seem reasonable? Just leave it alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've marked it as good first issue. I'm not sure it's actually a good first issue. It's definitely a help wanted issue.
I would agree with that. Let's take that off.
But yeah, I think we can leave that one open, and if we stumble across a C++ expert that can help us fix it, then we will gladly take them up on that.
I like it. Which namespaces are increase the number of services? Oh, this is Agones controller service account permissions to create pods in any namespace. To be a namespace role instead, so that it only got it in particular namespaces.
Yeah, so there are two things here. One is that during installation time, you have to know which namespaces to install the role into. We already know through Helm
Anyway.
installation time which namespaces we're going to tell Agones to manage. So I think that part's okay. And then the second part is we have to, and we probably already do tell Agones which ones to look at, or maybe not. Maybe we just list everywhere and filter it, because it's not going to be able to list everywhere anymore if it doesn't have permission, if we don't give it a cluster-wide role. So we basically have to change the code to only do lists in the namespaces that it's been configured for, instead of filtering after the fact. And that might mean we have to switch from a single lists of all to n lists in each of the namespaces that we're managing, which adds a little bit of complexity in the code.
Yeah, I wonder what it would actually do to the code. Well, I wonder what would break in the code, I think is what I'm actually thinking of.
Right. So like say you change it, I guess you could experiment by just like taking away the existing role binding, adding one just for the default namespace, because that's what we do by default in the installation, and then starting some pods in other namespaces and seeing if the controller freaks out.
And if it freaks out, or if it just doesn't get it.
Yeah, which means that that would be sort of a no-op, and then this would just be a Helm change.
It would be a Helm
which
change.
would be pretty straightforward.
I'm gonna put a help wanted on this.
Okay, this one also seems like, from the investigation perspective, would be an easy thing for somebody like we just described to reproduce.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't freak out, it would actually be a pretty easy change, because it would just be changing the Helm stuff.
In the community meeting, seems like a good first step would be to change the variables in the Helm config and see and what might break. Really, nothing breaks. And the since we're already telling Agones which namespaces it has access to. Sounds good. Lovely. Moderate. This seems very topical right now. Separate deployment for Agones allocator. Oh, this was.
It's like a separate Helm chart.
Or be able to turn off everything else, essentially.
Yep. Is that not possible right now?
I don't know if you can say don't install the controller.
Because you need the CRDs for the allocator service to work, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think this is, here we go. This is what you said. So the CRDs are always installed, no conditionals, because you need Yeah, you need those. Those are important. I guess here's an interesting question. If you had Agones installed in your cluster, but no controller, what's the point?
So just thinking about that. So I'm trying to figure out where we stuck it. Third-party examples. Where was it? So we have the allocator endpoint sample that we've got checked in, which uses Cloud Run to sort of do multi-cluster allocation.
Yep.
Somebody, and I feel like I thought it was linked from our third-party section, but maybe I'm missing it. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong place. Here it is. The Fairwinds folks made an Agones allocator client, which does, I think that's what it was. No, maybe it was, oh, this is what it was. I don't know who made this one. It's under AWS samples, and it has a nice little picture. So you can throw this up on screen if you want. They're doing something similar, except they're actually running a GKE cluster with just the allocator service and using multi-cluster allocation from that to do multi-cluster allocation. So like they call it a routing cluster. So it doesn't run any game servers. It doesn't need a controller in it. It just has an allocator service, and then it uses MCA to talk to the other clusters in the same way that like the Cloud Run allocation endpoint can talk to the other clusters and be a proxy. So this, I think, would be the use case for doing it. If you wanted to set this sort of thing up, then in that routing cluster, you need the CRDs, you need the allocator service, you don't need the Agones controller, you aren't running any game servers. And yeah, it should work, right? Because if you've got the Agones CRDs, then you can use that to sort of plumb the information for the allocator service on how to talk to its friendly neighborhood clusters that are actually running game servers. So I think this is literally the use case for it. I don't know if this was filed by somebody who was working on this, or this is sort of an independent question, but this is where you'd use it.
Don't know. Okay, that makes sense. All right, so it sounds like you need to. Okay, so it's what was I going to say? Not a bad thing. Doesn't need to be stale. At some point, someone could do it if we wanted to.
Right.
Okay, so probably just leave this one alone. And it also sounds like really it's about having an option not to install the controller.
Yes, I think so.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else, or you may not want to install like or you can already turn off like the ping service if you want.
You can already turn off the allocator service if you want. I don't think right now you can turn off the controller.
No, I don't think so. Okay, let's leave that one alone.
I think it's reasonable. I think it's not something I think we're going to prioritize. But if somebody wants to do it, so I think actually help wanted would be a good thing to stick there.
Like it's
cool. All right, I just tagged it.
Good first issue. Given that it's probably a help wanted. No, I'm asking if it should be a good first issue.
I mean, I think it's a small Helm change. I mean, it could be a good first issue if this is something that people want to do. I guess again, like from a personal perspective, I'm not going to encourage someone to do this because it's not something. I don't know. When I think about like the Helm configuration, we already have a ton of options, and at some point we have to start thinking about the Helm surface of options. In some ways, starts to feel like an API that is kind of growing very organically. And when you look at like the Helm charts themselves, they turn into this templated mess of like you can't actually tell what's going on unless you have like a very deep understanding and global view of them, which starts to become really ugly over time. Like we're maybe already there, and we should think about like what that means. I don't know. I was watching a video that Brian Grant had created about a year ago about how awful these things were, and it made me think.
And you're like, oh, that looks familiar. Oh no.
I was like, oh, we're totally doing that. Great.
We We have a lot of
So
stuff.
yes, well, if somebody sent a PR for this because they really wanted it, I would say that's fine. I'm not sure I want to encourage somebody to
go
add
after
extra
it.
complexity to the Helm chart when we don't have somebody we know would use it. I guess that's
Yeah.
really the point. If somebody says, I need this, I'm going to use it, that's different than let's add complexity in case somebody might want to do something that they asked about 2 years ago.
Yep. All right.
Try to do like maybe one more.
Yeah, this is a fun one. I kind of want to keep this one. So this is having automation such that like if you allocated a game server and your matchmaker didn't actually send players to it, or maybe all the players happen to just like not connect, is there an automated way of being able to detect that and respond accordingly? Player tracking was going to help with this.
This is also something that game servers themselves could address, right? They can say, hey, I've been allocated, start a 5-minute timer. If nobody connects, just go ahead and exit or something, right? So
it's
definitely
nice to have.
solvable from the game server side.
Yeah.
So then the question is there something we can do on the infrastructure side that is generally applicable, sort of reusable across use cases that makes it so you don't have to write that custom code in every game server?
Yeah. And I think there's also some useful things for like if you're thinking about lobby servers and stuff like that, where if it's like, oh, I haven't had players for the last 15 minutes, so like kill it off. And having that be sort of generic as part of our accounts and list stuff. So I think yes, let's keep it. I think but I think it'll end up getting moved once we have like lists and counts, in which case then it just becomes a case of like how long and which list or count do you want to use as your I have players.
Right.
Let me actually make a note of that.
Yeah, it's like Cyril back in 2019 said the same thing I did, which was game server could just shut down.
Yeah, you can do it yourself. But
idea.
It would be like if we're building functionality where we're going to track like who is connected, then it seemed like it's a nice to have to be able to help solve that problem for you.
Yeah, and somebody said this issue can occur in a variety of games. It'd be nice if Agones would do it, right? I think that's kind of what we're saying is, yes, you can do it yourself, but it would be great if Agones could provide a way to do this for you automatically through a simple configuration.
Yeah, I like it. I like it.
Cool.
Awesome. Ooh. Oh my God, only got 7
this
minutes.
one has not come up recently.
It has not come up recently, actually. I'm almost tempted to mark it as stale, as like a non-Agones problem, but a Kubernetes problem, and sort of be like, let's shove this upstream.
Yeah, the last comment I put on here was a while ago, and the link is broken, which is always fun. But we should check with SIG storage and see if anything has happened since 2 years ago. Maybe this sort of functionality does exist upstream at this point.
Yeah.
Or maybe that link is broken because the KEP was rejected and it no longer exists. That could totally also be it.
It does also feel like I know a lot of people who are just like, I'm just gonna make a big Docker image. Or they're gonna be like really sophisticated about it and sort of do like chunked asset management and like diff changes and like that kind of stuff. So stale or non-stale, how do we feel?
I think we should mark it as stale. I think I found the new KEP. It's called volume populators. I'm trying to figure out where it's at in terms of implementation. The whole point of KEPs was to make this easier to understand. Summary. Okay. Volume populators will be implemented as out-of-tree controllers. In-tree might do some validation. So it sounds like Kubernetes itself is saying this is not going to be solved in tree as part of your Kubernetes installation, but there might be other tools you can install in your cluster that will auto-populate volumes for you. Cool. All right. I think with that, we should wrap stuff up and give people a couple minutes back.
That sounds good. I will stop presenting. And new cap. All right. Also, yeah, I haven't heard people complaining about doing volume mounts. I don't know enough about volume mounts to be like, this is easy now because reasons.
Right. But yeah, I think we definitely talked about this, and I don't know if it was one of those like speculative, we think people are going to run into this issue versus someone actually said, this doesn't work for me type of issue. I think, you think you had unmuted. Was there something you wanted to add?
Cool. All right. I don't have anything else. We'll do the outro. Well, thank you everyone for joining us yet again for another episode of the Agones Community Podcast. It's a delight and a pleasure to hear from you all, and we appreciate all the listeners that have tuned in, both live and listening to the recording. You can see us again next month, where we'll be joining once more. You can follow us at AgonesDev on Twitter or go to agones.dev on the website and see all the community contributions that you can make. See you next time.
And you have to do like the fade to black and smash your camera.
Zoop.
Cool. See you guys next time. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.